Hello, my name's Alex. Welcome to the Beliefs Bazaar. This video is going to be about remote manipulation of the human nervous system and the potential technologies that could be able to do this thing. As you might see from the title of this video, I used a couple of buzzwords like Havana Syndrome and electromagnetic frequencies, or EMF, and 5G. And these are all kind of related because I think some of the things that are attributed to 5G or just EMF in general is what the things that people think it is the potentially this other technology. And that is because there's a lot of things that, aren't really explained very well that happen to people. And, it's kind of concurrently happening as we develop newer technologies that, the more developed they are, the less and less people understand them. And that makes sense. I am not personally, I don't have a college degree in anything. So, I'm still at the bottom of the pile, if you will, as far as like my understanding of these things, but I have just enough of an understanding to relate to, the average person, kind of the broad concepts of these things. Okay. So I guess the first thing I kind of wanted to go to, and I'll link to all the research or rather the source materials that I either pull up or talk about in the comments below. So if you want to read the entirety of any of the articles or things that I talk about, the links for that will be down below. So to start off here, I thought I'd bring up 5G. The 5G is a newer development in cellular and communications technology. And, the rollout for that was concurrently around the same time as the COVID pandemic hit. So, there's a lot of people who, don't understand virology and don't understand, frequency technology and communications technology. And so if you have a less than sufficient understanding of both those things, you might just see like, oh, hey, all these towers are going up and everyone's getting sick, like those are happening at the same time. Yes. Are they related? No. And, even some of the technology, the potential technology that I'll talk about in a minute, even with that technology, there's not really any way for this stuff to induce a viral infection. It's just not, it doesn't work like that. All right. So there's just no way that EMF frequencies, even disruptive, like what we think of as like the damaging radiation from like uranium or other radioactive things. Now that's alpha radiation from my understanding. And that is, a proton, so it's fairly large. That can disrupt molecules or atoms and stuff, having a particle of that size go through you or your body. But that still does not induce a viral infection, because a virus is an organism that is transmitted from person to person that can't be carried with a frequency. It just doesn't work like that. So anyway, what is 5G? In telecommunications, 5G is the fifth generation of cellular network technology as the successor to the fourth generation and has been deployed by mobile operators worldwide since 2019. It is essentially a combination of frequencies that are used as well as, bandwidth. So meaning like compression and other aspects of communications that we can send essentially more data through, potentially have a wider or, a higher capacity with different frequencies used for communications. Anyway, the thing that I think maybe might be confused or confusing for people is that millimeter waves have a more limited range, requiring many small cells. They can be impeded or blocked by materials and walls or windows or pedestrians. And so that is to say that this frequency and range of frequencies doesn't go through the body or walls or other materials as easily as some other bandwidth or some other ranges of frequency. And so that might have led to the idea that, it's absorbed or somehow like, because it doesn't pass through humans as well as some other things, that it's somehow like, being absorbed and fucking with our body in some kind of way. there's no data supporting that. I just, it says at the bottom here that it has also been the subject of health concerns and misinformation, including discredited conspiracy theories linking it to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I mentioned that a little earlier. It just so happened that as most of these, 5G service networks were being installed and put into use, coincided with the same time that we had the COVID pandemic. So, undereducated people will see one thing happening and another thing happening and think, oh, they must be related, That's correlation, not causation. All right. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, I mentioned Havana Syndrome, and this is an interesting thing. There's been many articles that have come out in the preceding handful of years anyway. And so there's a lot of speculation about what this could be, right? And so I'll just read a couple of blurbs here. Havana Syndrome, also known as anomalous health incidents, is a disputed medical condition. Starting in 2016, U.S. and Canadian government officials and their families reported symptoms of AHIs in about a dozen overseas locations. Reported symptoms include a sudden onset associated with a perceived localized loud sound or chronic symptoms that lasted for months, such as disabling cognitive problems, balance, dizziness, insomnia, and headaches. Havana Syndrome is not officially recognized as a disease by the medical community. And I definitely recommend reading this entire article. The thing that I wanted to read here is this thing. 2023 review article written by Bartholomew and Bola concluded that Havana Syndrome was erroneously classified as a novel entity due to a moral panic based on the fear of foreign entities such as the Russians or Cubans attacking the U.S., the overinterpretation of data, misconceptions about psychological illness, and coverage and leaks by the media. The authors stated that the U.S. intelligence community had concluded that Havana Syndrome is a, quote, socially constructed catch-all category for an array of pre-existing health conditions, responses to environmental factors, and stress reactions that were lumped under a single label, end quote. A 2024 review article by Connolly et al. Surveying multiple peer-reviewed studies concluded that the cause of AHIs is still unknown. The review discussed several possible causes, including mass psychogenic illness and head trauma, but did not endorse a specific cause. Now, that's all fascinating. And that is kind of the general consensus that people have reached in news. And, there was a big New York Times article about it a few years ago. I don't know if that's what that article, I don't know if that's the article that was in the New York Times. I didn't look that up for this video, but there was some things. And, the general consensus was that, the CIA said that this technology isn't a thing. So it's not a thing, right? And, some real journalistic integrity there. And, I don't know, the New York Times, there's been speculation, and it is, I have no way to prove this, but they seem to have ties to intelligence services and generally go to them for statements and quotes regarding a myriad of things. So, I feel like if an intelligence service didn't want us to know about a thing, they wouldn't tell the New York Times. They wouldn't publish an article about it, So, whether or not, again, I don't know if I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I don't have enough data or anything to say whether or not these specific things that are referred to in the Havana Syndrome, umbrella, are anything. I don't know what it is. I'm willing to concede that it probably is a level of paranoid psychosis or some sort of thing like that. But that always kind of bugged me about well, if that is indeed a thing, why do these people, and let's be real, they're spies. They're not just diplomats or whatever. These are spies in other countries, and they're experiencing weird things. So why do those people think that they're being targeted by some sort of energy weapon or something like that, I always found that fascinating. And so, along with these other things, Havana Syndrome was kind of happening, but I'm also, personally, I'm very interested in, the mind and, psychedelics and those kind of things. So I had actually stumbled upon what I'm about to share through that kind of angle, where I was looking up the possibility for there being some sort of technology that could induce a psychedelic mind state without having to take the chemicals or some other, essentially without having to have a chemically induced psychedelic trip. Is there a possibility for technology that can induce the same brain state, right? So that's what I was actually looking up when I found this thing. And I guess I'll just get into it here. This is a paper article thing I found. And again, I'll link to this in the notes below. This is essentially a response to a presentation in mid-March 2016. The Polish defense minister and Antoni Macierewicz, I know I didn't pronounce that right, visited the University of Father Tadeusz Rydzyk to participate in the discussion of problems of contemporary politics, armed conflicts, and terrorism. One of the listeners asked him whether Poland has got a strategy how to solve illegal experiments with electromagnetic weapons on unwitting Polish citizens. And Tony replied that his ministry is conducting an analysis on this subject and that he is going to establish a commission which will investigate the complaints of Polish citizens. So in this way, the Polish Minister of Defense admitted that there exist electromagnetic weapons capable to interfere with the functioning of human organism and that it may be used on Polish citizens. Now, again, I recommend reading this whole article, but for the sake of this video, I'm just going to jump to a couple points that are made throughout this thing. So one of them was that water makes up a significant portion of the human body, 50 to 70%. Large portions of this water contain particles which have either accepted or lost an electron and therefore have either a positive or negative charge. Those particles may be atoms, molecules, or clusters of atoms or molecules. They are called ions. Some liquids in the human body are full of these ions. They can be compared to electrolytes or liquids which conduct electrical current. The most important part in the activity of the human nervous system represent electrical currents, which are occurring as flows of those charged particles in the nervous fibers. While in electrical wires, the electrical current is a flow of free electrons, in the human body and the human nervous system is a flow of charged ions. And so, the source of electrical currents in the nerve fibers are neuronal membranes. The electrical current start to flow in the nervous fibers as a result of change of voltage between the inner and outer surface of neural membranes. This change of voltage, on the other hand, is principally caused by electrical currents in the electrolyte, which is inside the nerve fibers. Real quick, I had a couple graphics for this. We can measure the signals that our brain and, as a result of these electromagnetic signals going throughout the body, that always creates some sort of magnetic field or some kind of thing. And that's what we can detect when we use something like, as you can see in this picture, this is a device that people use to monitor brainwaves. It's called an electroencephalogram, and it produces, it can detect these frequencies and whatnot that are produced by the brain as you have a thought or what have you. The nervous system, if you're not familiar already, is throughout the body. As such, it, is what allows us to move and think and do all the things that our body does by sending signals down from the brain throughout the body. And in these cells, as it just mentioned in this thing I just read, the way that these signals travel is by creating, it essentially a charge builds up in the cell, and that causes it to release a signal to the next cell, and the charge builds up there, and so on and so forth. So this happens at a very rapid rate, but essentially travels from one neuron to the next by way of these electric these electric signals. And as it travels throughout the body, it is like a pulse. It's like a frequency. Different frequencies throughout the nervous system operate different parts of the body. So, like my right hand will move and that'll probably register a different frequency than my left. That's they're very coarse description, but that's kind of the gist, right? And so, this is kind of a fun graphic that I chose, but it kind of, if you think about these signals and wavelengths from other things, I just mentioned that the certain bandwidths of communications cannot penetrate certain things, whether it's human body or walls or other materials. These things can't travel through everything, but there are signals and whatnot that do travel through your body. And so, as it's suggested in this document, sorry, I'll read some more of this. 2014, Chinese scientists published the results of an experiment in which they searched for microwave conductivity of electrolyte solution. In the introduction, they stressed that their experiment, quote, plays an important role in investigating the interaction between electromagnetic waves and the biological tissues that have a high water content and a significant concentration of ions, end quote. They used a solution of salt for their experiment. The chemical formula of salt is NaCl, which is sodium chloride. It means it contains atoms of sodium and chloride. Ions of both of these atoms play an important role in the firing of nerve cells. The experiment proved that this electrolyte is conductive for microwaves up to the 20 gigahertz frequency. For the solutions with higher concentrations of salt, the conductivity of electrolytes was higher with microwaves than with direct current. In other words, the microwaves produced electrical currents in electrolytes, which means that if microwaves penetrate into the electrolyte, which is inside the nerve fibers, they will produce electrical currents in there. If a human being is supposed to feel something, do something, or think about something, it is necessary that large quantities of these neurons start firing at the same frequency. The chance for the effectiveness of the manipulation of the human nervous system with pulsed microwaves is secured by the fact that the variations of the activity of the human nervous system for various perceptions, reactions, emotions, actions, and thoughts are expressed in different frequencies or sequels of frequencies. Walter J. Freeman, who studied for decades the electrical activity of the human brain, simultaneously introducing multitudes of microelectrodes into different parts of the brain, wrote that in the brain, quote, transmission occurs at some characteristic frequency and reception occurs in sets tuned to that frequency. So that's kind of what I just said about your brain puts out a frequency and it correlates with part of your body that is set to respond to a certain frequency. Yeah, and that's how, that's how we develop like motor skills and stuff like that. It's the refining of the signals being sent to our body. If it does the thing we want, we're like, okay, cool. And we repeat that and it gets kind of locked in. And so essentially, like, as we learn to be more, physically dexterous and, develop skill sets, that is just our brain cataloging and refining and fine tuning those frequency responses to what we want to happen with our body. Before I read the rest of this, I was hesitant to even talk about this because any sufficiently experienced like electromagnetic frequency expert will be able to replicate the frequencies required to manipulate the nervous system. However, the data that is required to know what particular frequencies to use for certain effects is still something that's kind of hard to achieve because you need all this equipment for the EEG machine, for example, and then you need to be able to interpret it and all that kind of stuff. And so the average person won't be able to do all that, and the people that are able to do that are probably already working on this shit. So here it is. Anyway, I'll keep reading from this document, but honestly, you can read it yourself. It's in the notes below. But I'll continue. If you don't feel like reading it, I'll just read some parts that I found particularly interesting. All right, I'm just going to continue reading with this thing here. Scientists experimenting with pulsed microwaves reported that electroencephalographic recordings of animals' brain activities got synchronized with the pulsing of microwaves transmitted into their brains. So I found that pretty fascinating. I'm just going to jump ahead here to this. The reason why the cell phone radiation produces false sensations in some individuals is that the information transfer in the cell phone system is carried out by low-frequency microwave pulses, which reach the electrolyte in the electrosensitive individual's nervous system. Since the nervous activity takes place in low frequencies, it is triggered or incited by those pulses. And I don't know if I read specifically about this thing earlier in the thing, but it's important to know that cellular technology and, most, I think, wireless technologies that use, modern transmitters have the capability, they have a microwave pulse transmitter. Whether or not it's used in this manner is, that's kind of a gray area. But just it's important to know that this technology has this capability, right? Communications technologies have the capability to transmit pulsed microwaves. So, to continue, published experiments dedicated to the effects of microwaves on the human nervous system used microwave frequencies which did not exceed much more than 1 gigahertz, thus complying with the findings of Chinese scientists on the conductivity of electrolyte from microwaves. In his experiments, Ross Addy in the 1980s used 450 megahertz frequency pulsed at 16 hertz, thus causing calcium efflux from the nerve cells, which reduced the human being's ability to concentrate. This experiment was repeated many times with the same results. Alan H. Frey, as early as the year 1961, managed to transmit sound perceptions into the human brain by using pulse frequencies ranging from 425 to 1310 megahertz. People describe the microwave sound as a buzz, clicking, hiss, or knocking, depending on several transmitter parameters, i.e. pulse width and pulse repetition rate. In other words, on the frequency of pulses. When varying the transmitter parameters, Alan H. Frey was able to produce in human beings, quote, the perception of severe buffeting of the head, or pins and needles sensation, end quote. So that is particularly fascinating. His experiment was replicated many times with the same results. It was therefore proved that it is possible to repeatedly produce the same delusions in the human brain when microwaves are pulsed in frequencies which mimic the human brain's neuronal activity. In 1975, Don Justison, neuropsychologist and director of neuropsychology and behavioral radiology research laboratories with the Veterans Administration Medical Center, published in the American Psychologist Journal an experiment where the recordings of pronounced digits from 1 to 10 were transmitted into the brain via pulsed microwaves, and where the subject of the experiment could hear and recognize the digits. So that is fascinating, especially to consider that using these pulsed microwaves, you can essentially induce the perception of hearing words, numbers, sounds, and so that's interesting. This experiment proved not only feasibility of remote manipulation of the human nervous system, but as well as feasibility of manipulation of the human mind. When encoding human speech into pulsed microwaves, the procedure is similar to radio broadcasting, where human speech only needs to be converted into pulsed microwaves. It is possible to transmit either audible or inaudible messages into the human brain. A human being cannot hear ultrasound messages, but the brain perceives them, and a person's behavior can be controlled and manipulated in this way. The density of electromagnetic energy needed to remotely control the activity of the human nervous system does not exceed the standards set by the European Union. Let's just remember that cell phone signals can penetrate into the human brain. Okay, that was what I was mentioning earlier. I hadn't got to that point yet, but essentially the power level and frequencies that are required to do this thing, to manipulate the mind and nervous system, that is possible. That is it's within the capabilities of cell phone technology currently. A skillful radio amateur is capable to produce a transmitter able to remotely control the activity of the human nervous system for criminal groups, which could then endanger the mental and physical health of people in their surroundings. They could easily put drivers to sleep by pulsing microwaves into the sleep frequencies, or with more sophisticated pulsing, they could stop a person's heartbeat and make him or she die. It is known that Alan H. Frey produced heart attacks in frogs with pulsed microwaves. Now that is especially fascinating and dangerous because, what can you even, that's indetectable, or certainly it won't linger after it's happening. So if you're the victim of something like this, of this technology, which again, if I didn't say before, I have no definitive evidence that this technology exists or is being used. This is just a description of how that technology would work. All right, and I'll conclude the reading from this document with this last paragraph that I'll read here. Any technology which would produce in the human nervous system the flows of electric currents with the frequencies of its activity can be used to remotely control the activity of the human body and brain. At the present time, pulse microwaves are the only technology known to be fit to produce this effect, but easily with contemporary fast advances in the scientific research, especially in quantum physics, other technologies can be developed or already have been developed. Therefore, the legislation should ban as well the use of so far unknown or unpublished technologies which enable remote manipulation of electrical currents in the human brain and body. Okay, this document, if you go read it, I read earlier, this was actually a kind of a summary of a presentation that was given to Polish legislators. And so that was specifically talking about like the nature of legislation that should be written to regulate these things. Anyway, that is all to say that this technology exists. Whether or not it's been used, whether or not it was responsible for the symptoms of Havana Syndrome, that is, it's not irrelevant, but it's essentially doesn't really matter to me whether or not all of those instances were, or one of them was, or none of them were, because the people that experienced those things were aware of this technology, and that is why they think that they were being messed with, because they are aware of this technology and they know the symptoms of it because they're aware. You're right. So for them all to be having this mass psychosis, that might even be true. But why are they having this? Why are they coming to this conclusion? It's because they're aware of this technology, and whether or not it was used on them or haphazardly or to test on just average citizens and stuff, this technology exists. And so I'm particularly cautious about, there's not really a whole lot you can do if you live in the world today. You're going to be exposed to a myriad of communications, signals that are just floating through, flying through the air all the time. The potential is out there for this to be a thing. As a result of this, I'm a little bit less, I don't keep my phone next to my bed when I'm asleep. I'm not fond of the idea of much wearable technology, especially anything that goes on your head, like the Google glasses or anything else that you wear, like whether it be even like earbuds or like Wi-Fi headsets or anything that has a Wi-Fi transmitter in it. I don't like the idea of it being on your person in a fixed distance to your brain, because that is also part of the thing about frequencies and whatnot, is that a lot of times it's a function of distance to the transmitter. And in this case with communications, frequencies, and technology, I don't know if that's as much of an issue. So it really might not even matter how far away you are from this thing, but it would certainly be more effective if it had a fixed position relative to your brain. So, that's not to say that any of this technology is designed to do this, but the potential for these kind of bad actors using technology that we use in our everyday lives to manipulate us is definitely a possibility. Anyway, I just thought this was interesting. I won't always be talking about conspiratorial stuff, but I do talk about, so far my channel is very new as of this video. I don't have a whole lot of content yet, but a lot of it is going to be geared towards beliefs, hence the name of the channel, and, the ramifications of belief and belief systems, how that plays out. And then also I like to talk about progressive politics and progressive policy ideas, because, I feel like that is a direction that we should be going. And I talk about that in some other videos. So please like the video and subscribe if you want to be updated on my content. And like I said, it isn't very focused on one specific thing right now, but it is all stuff that I find interesting and like to talk about. And, also, this is a good outlet for me because my wife doesn't have to hear me ramble about this stuff all the time. So what's good for this is good for me and it's good for her. So thank you for watching this video.